lovely introduction. And thank you for letting me do this stuff. I feel so lucky that I fell backwards into doing this work. What I thought I would do, oh, there. I'll stop share. I forget you can't see me. Hi. I thought what I would do for this talk is go through a series of vignettes to explain some lessons learned. It's sort of a history of my doing this work with the consort and the evolution of my thinking, and I'll show you some tricks and evolving ideas and that sort of thing. And I'm going to start where I started with doing this kind of projectionist work. And it was indeed as a projectionist that I started when the consort did their Canticas de Santa Maria concert in 2011. They put together this fabulous slideshow of images from a couple of the original manuscript sources because they're rich and wonderful and fabulous. Here I can show you what that looks like. Okay, how do I share my screen again? Here we go. There we go. So the cantigas. This is what the source looks like. It's one of the great works of medieval multimedia. You have a source that has music and text and fantastic images. So why wouldn't you put it on the screen if you can? It's a really great idea, and David and Ellen did a fantastic job putting together this slideshow that I was then hired to come and push the button to advance the slides. And it was over the course of, yeah, I stopped the share, I'll go back in a second. It was over the course of the rehearsals and that weekend of concerts that I had some ideas about how you might be able to juice up the visuals a little bit, to exploit the screen a little bit more and to make the images pop a little bit more. So I asked if it was okay if I made some tweaks over that weekend. They said yes. And then when it came time the next year to travel with this show to Boston, and then subsequent concerts, I asked if I could go further, and they said yes. So we were off to the races. I kept getting more extreme with each iteration, panicking a little bit at each step, wondering if I was going too far. So I always asked friends and my all the smart people I know to take a look and see if I'd finally overstepped my bounds. Let me show you something of what this all involved. So that show was essentially, get my pointer here. So you see the cartoon from the Codice Rico, the 6 panels of this particular cantiga. This is the one that has a marvelous depiction of baseball. Who knew? So you have the image on one side, the text on the other side. And what I did in this first layer of adjustment was make the images as big as I could, with the caveat that these are scans of a facsimile, a print facsimile, which means that it's not the highest resolution and there are some artifacts from that scanning. So you can't zoom in too far without having some unpleasantness, visual unpleasantness. But what I tried to do was go in for details when possible. So here, not using the whole screen, but still calling out this one chunk for mention. Here I have used the whole screen, in part because there was room up here to put the text, which I have with some glow behind it to make it stick out a bit. Okay, so these were the first tweaks, the first ideas to, we have this whole big screen, let's get it as full as possible with imagery. And one of the other questions that that came up really early, and you might not think of it, is something that I am going to call, what's that font? And I do this in part to talk about the font and to talk about PowerPoint, because I'm using PowerPoint to do all of this. Yes, that bane of our existence in academia and in the business world. You can do a lot with PowerPoint that's very subtle and artful and wonderful. There's a lot that you cannot use PowerPoint for in our context, like that bouncy intro that I just did, or this little shaky of the text, or this kind of zooming out. So thank you for letting me get that out of my system. You'll never see that, almost never see that in a show. But I do want to say a little bit about the font, because it was important to me to make sure that it's as legible as possible. And first of all, that means making sure it's large. You want the text to be large. You want it to stand out. And I did some research and found this font, Teresias LP font, which is designed for legibility. It's designed for signage and supertitles and this sort of stuff. So that became my house font for these purposes. And it's sort of a hybrid between a sans serif and a serif. Here you see sans, and there is just a hint of a serif at the ends, which is what helps this particular font be as legible as possible. Compare that to Arial Black, which is pretty good. I mean, that's fine. It's big and you can see it. Again, 30 points, which might be larger than you imagine. Here's a lovely font, but not good for, it calls too much attention to itself to really be good for our purposes. It's too pretty, in other words. Here's another gorgeous one, which is ridiculous. You can't, this is not for body text purposes, obviously, although you will see this all the time in titles that I've used. A wonderful, another font that you will see, but never for the text itself, never for the super titles, only for titles. And as anyone who works in design will know, it's always good to match the font, the typeface, to the purposes at hand. So I've tried to come up with a collection of historical handwriting adjacent fonts. Some of them I don't get a chance to use very often because of the kinds of music sources that are available. There's not a lot of a 9th century, the sort of 9th century repertoire you would need for, say, this Northumbrian hand. This is wonderful, but gosh, when are you going to use it? These are small and kind of illegible. I use orotund all the time. It's suggestive and doesn't lock you down into one time or place. Anyhow, those are some of the considerations there at the very beginning. I haven't played around with font much since then. But I want to show you some of the other considerations there at the very beginning. And this screenshot gives you a hint at what is coming at the end of this particular piece. It's the one visual joke that I stuck into this, this first project, and I was really nervous about it, and it ended up being okay. But let me start out here. So we have the beginning of the piece, again, with the text on one side, the image on the other, and there's an unmeasured introduction to this piece. And because it's it takes its time to get to where the piece starts in earnest, I faded out the text pretty slowly here, as you'll see. Let me.
Como Santa Maria fez descobrir uma posta de carne que furtaram a uns romeus na vila de Rocamadour.
The text comes out very slowly. starts to be measured. And here, that's where the pulse begins, and that's where the image changes. And oh, you'll see there, why did it do that? Okay. Come on. Where is it? You'll see that I'm leaving dark space. I'm not filling the whole screen with these images because I can't. They're not high resolution enough. So the size of the image on the screen changes. You do what you can. So let me jump ahead. There again, you see how those images seem to shift and move. And I'll go ahead to the very end for my first visual joke on screen. It's very subtle. I mean, for context, okay, let me unshare. For context, this is the cantiga about the lost pork chop that Holy Mary miraculously reveals in the chest over in the corner. They hang it in the church.
Shawn, I just have to say, when you said I was nervous about this, but it turned out okay. She's being modest. It was kind of the hit of the show, and we won't let her take it out now.
Well, it just struck me that this final panel from this scene has the pork chop dead center, and it just looked like a 40s film to me. It just called for one of those. I'm not sure what the terminology is for that. But here I will add, I created that using radial gradients in PowerPoint. One of the many things that I created whole cloth that I now know exist as push button filters and push button things you can insert in video programs and graphic programs. I discovered layers. My graphic design pals out there, you will know what that means. I reinvented a lot of wheels over the past few years, but it's been fun. Okay, so that was the first project. All right. Fauvel was the second project, for me at least, that the consort asked me to work on. That was 2016, and my lessons this time are guiding and tricking the eye. Well, I learned a lot of things, but we'll boil it down to that. Just as a reminder, here's what the original source looks like. Again, it's medieval multimedia. You have fantastic, famous illuminations alongside of text, alongside of music. There's no reason in the world not to put this on the screen when you're giving a concert. And in this case, well, with the cantigas, I'd been given a set of images. Here, I could go to Gallica Online and pull them myself with some limitations. You can't download an entire folio, an entire page at maximum resolution. You have to pick and choose your details, which is fine because in PowerPoint, pan and zoom doesn't really work. We'll come back to pan and zoom in a little bit. So it's just fine to pick out details. And here's what that ended up looking like. Now I can choose a part of the page that will be great for setting off just what I want to do. So here we have Portier mieux. I'd rather be a swineherd. So you have the music and text being performed alongside the translation. This, the text over which it's showing there, that's just part of the narrative. It's unrelated. And I very tentatively used a little bit of gradient here So there's nothing covering up over here, and the gradient gets a little darker, which sets off the text a bit. Now, I was a little worried because with my scholar hat on, I don't want to mess with the sources, right? But it helps the text pop out. So, okay, I'll go ahead and use that gradient. And I just kept going down this road until it got pretty extreme. So from this very subtle hint of manipulation, we come to something like this, which is also from Fauvel. It's a very tight detail of an image of Holy Mary giving side eye to the courtiers. And using shading again with gradients, it draws the eye to that through line and downplays the surrounding part of the image and sets off the text up above. Okay, now getting really daring. The pièce de résistance, and the thing that I'm still excited about is this kind of thing. Taking shading of various shapes and mimicking an organic looking bit of shade. I see this and I imagine being in the reading room or in the palace or wherever, with the book open in front of a window and the sun streaming in. That's the fiction of this. And seeing this, it just clicked like, oh, right. You can manipulate these source images and not do it in a destructive way, but do it in a way that puts you in the room as a viewer, because that's the thing that is so great as a scholar, as a performer scholar, going to the original sources and being in the reading room with them. That's what it feels like. So that's what this kind of shading is trying to get at. And I've sometimes gone a little overboard in that direction, but you know, it's all good, live and learn. I still think this is one of the most effective ones I came up with. Even the gold looks like it's shining in the sun, the imagined sunshine coming in. Another thing that these slideshows are great for is it's another value added prospect. So it's not just keeping viewers out of the program book looking at a translation. It's also explaining jokes, explaining little tricks of wordplay that would be really complicated. They need a footnote. It would need a footnote in a translation in the program book. With it up on screen, you don't need a footnote at all. You can just make it plain. And here's that part in Fauvel where the text explains what Fauvel's name is all about and all of the terrible things that he embodies. No sound on this one. Where is it? Where did it go? Right. So his name is made up of flattery, F, avarice, A. Again, this was read in French, so this is why we have the full translation here. Now, this is a long explanation of flattery, a rather long one of avarice. The others are going to be faster. So we're starting in the middle of the list, in the middle of his name. So how am I going to get through this and still make it spell out to Fauvel? Well, this is what I came up with. Starting in the middle, pulling it down, adding flattery and avarice up there. And now we see fauvel next to fauvel, which sort of explains what is happening here. And that prevents the inevitable question, how did we get from two V's to a U and a V? But even if you're not familiar with 14th century French orthography, you still get where this is going. And that's something that the visuals can do really brilliantly. All right, so far so good. Hopping out of sharing screen there for a second. The next project that I was brought in for was inevitably something that's not medieval multimedia. There are only so many grandiose, royal, world famous sources of medieval music that have narrative text and intense, gorgeous, fantabulous illuminations. It's a short list. Eventually you're going to get to the end of that list and you have to do something else. So what do you do for projects that don't have a single source that tell you what images to use? And I worried about that quite a bit because, again, with the scholar hat on, what's my motivation? Is it okay? Are we just adding pretty pictures? I was very conflicted and also very worried. And I'll give you a sense of what I was desperately wanting to avoid. Let's put it that way. So I'll share my screen again. And right. So now what? Just as a reminder, here is the medieval multimedia. That's where we've been.
Shawn, can you expand the image so that we get the full screen?
Oh wait, how is it not doing that? What am I? It is fully expanded on my screen.
Oh, okay, then it's just mine. Sorry about that. Never mind.
Okay, okay. Thank you though. I mean, if there are issues like that, please do tell me. So I'm going to single out the, if you spend any time on classical music YouTube, you will have seen these sort of compilations that have an inexplicable collection of images to go along with it. We've got France, we've got Italy, we've got Germany, we've got panel paintings and illuminations, and we've jumped from the 9th century to the 14th and the 15th. It's just, it's all over the place, and that is my reaction. This particular image, because not only is it a random collection of images that have nothing to do with the music that's being played, they don't even change in a way that makes sense with the music. You know, they could at least have the change happen with a new phrase, you know, some sort of formal articulation that goes with the music. So it's the images aren't doing any work. They just fill time and space, and they draw attention to themselves because they're not in any way with the music. And that's a whole genre that you will find on YouTube. Wait, stop, don't do that. So that's the worst of the worst. There's also it's okay, but could do better. I'm going to share the screen again now. With apologies to Anonymous 4, because I adore them. This CD is a collection of love songs, as it says, by Francesco Landini, the great Italian composer of the 14th century. Now, this image is a 14th century image. Love songs, these are lovers, obviously, courtly love, they're in a garden, that's all great. The problem is that this is from the Codex Manesse. It's a pretty famous manuscript, illuminated manuscript. It's a very particular visual vocabulary, the colors, the shapes, the drapery, everything about it. Even if you don't see the text, as you can kind of glimpse over here, everything screams German. Why? These are songs by Landini. Why? When he was from Florence, 14th century Florence, there's no shortage of artwork to be had from 14th century Florence. This is, the image you're seeing now is from the Squarcialupi Codex, and you can see how different, this is early 15th century. This is an image of Francesco Landini, that particular composer. The visual vocabulary, the colors are entirely different. And there's no reason, if you are trying in the music to match time and place and getting the accent, you know, the pronunciation correct for 14th century French or Italian or whatever it might be. You choose particular instruments for your historically informed performance. Why not choose imagery that does the same thing if we're trying to transport people to the right time and place? So you might choose an image like this, a 14th century image from Tuscany. This is from Siena. Part of the problem is that these can be hackneyed because they're famous, or maybe famous if you've had the right classes in college. But certainly this part in the middle, these dancers are produced all the time. But you don't have to be hackneyed because trading, children looking over this balcony. You get the cathedral there in the upper corner. It's a hill town, so you get these very typical renderings of Italian architecture of the time. Workers building a tower. There's just everything in the world to luxuriate over, even in an image that is extremely familiar for this central bit right here. So for my money, go to the time and the place, and the rest will follow. So we come to Oswald, the German count, not German, German speaking. He's from Tyrol, the count, adventurer, writer of songs and both the text and the music, and quite a character, and quite out of my realm of expertise, in that German is not my, German speaking lands are out of my comfort zone. But this is a project that is squarely in that now category. What do we do for Oz? Okay, what manuscripts are connected to him? Well, there are a couple of manuscripts of his music where his works are transmitted. Here's one with this fabulous portrait. Okay, that's great. The other manuscript has, you know, also notated, and that's interesting. But you can only go so far. Here, I'll stop the share for a second. That's only going to take you so far. Okay, we've got this great portrait. We've got the music itself. You really want to spend an hour just looking at the notation. It doesn't really do justice to the character, to the stories being told individually in the pieces and in the overall narrative. So I wanted to find things that were right time, right place, right theme, and connected to Oswald if possible. So put on the researcher's hat, but not in as highfalutin a way as you might anticipate. I don't remember exactly the series of events that got me to the sources that I found, which I'll show to you in a minute. But I will clue you into where I start almost all of my research, and be prepared to be shocked and astounded and appalled. Google image search. This is a search for Austrian manuscript illumination. If you can take things out of your search terms, minus Pinterest. Pinterest is only a very last resort. Minus stock, that gets rid of a lot of the underbrush. And what you get when you start here are a lot of links to really useful institutions, collections, scholarship. This first hit is to the Austrian National Library. Here's that image there, manuscript illuminations from the National Library. Europeana is an aggregator for European collections, digital collections online. But you see other really great sources. Victoria and Albert Museum here. Bonhams, that's, now this is Northern Italy, but you might click through there and find some useful things at that auction house. The British Library. You start with the search and then drill down going in the direction you want to go. And it's all well and good. It's wonderful to go directly to National Library sites, directly to the great institutions, but you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't use Google, because it's just so powerful, especially these days. Oops. So some of the things I came up with in the course of this search for the sacred pieces, I used the Mirror of Human Salvation, which was a medieval text that had an extremely rich iconographic tradition, dozens and dozens and dozens of copies with exactly these scenes done by different artists at different times and places. I found this copy that's was made in Austria in the first half of the 15th century. Boom, we're right there with Oswald. That's perfect. The concert included some war songs. He was a knight, and one of the songs, "To Arms," and there's a dialogue between these brothers in arms. And I found an Art of War, Austria, again, 1437, so we're right on the nose, with these fantastic warlike images. On the bleeding edge of technology, firearms, which just came into play in Europe in the mid 15th century, and tying flaming things to animals who are then somehow supposed to run to the enemy. I'm not sure how that works. But there are riches to be had. That's one end of things. What I needed for the love songs was something like the Roman de la Rose. Well, there has to be a version of that kind of chivalric literature for German-speaking lands, and indeed there is. And here, Wikipedia, my friends. I make no apologies. Again, use the tools at your disposal. The thing about, it's all about being able to drill down and narrow down your searches. At this point, Wikipedia it's just a great starting point, like asking your either obsessed or smart friends, hey, if you were going to start to look into this, where would you start? That's what Wikipedia is. And indeed, I ended up using some materials from these fellows here. He was not on this list, but Dervish about a young Italian who comes through traveling and learns lots of lessons. Very Germanic visual style. You can see the German text to the side. He has all sorts of points, good and bad. Obviously, this is going into the mouth of hell. Here's a bear who is singing Alma Redemptoris Mater for some reason. Just marvelous little details like that. And here's another item that came up in that search. Wilhelm of Orleon. So it's a chivalric narrative that has these fantastic illuminations of his travels with detailed renderings of ships. It's just magnificent. I also found something that just could not be in the program. Mandeville's Travels, a very famous traveler's, a travelogue, not unlike Marco Polo, but French this time. These engravings or dry point, I can't remember exactly the technology. They're spectacular. It's Bohemia. That's pretty close. Yeah, and we're in the first quarter of the 15th century, and they're just extraordinary. So I'm looking into travel literature now to match up with Oswald's travels. How about some maps? Here's Frau Mauro's 15th century, even though it's Italian. Now that we're into travel, I think all bets are off. We don't have to stick to the Tyrol. And I also used the Catalan Atlas, obviously made in Catalonia, also around the same time. And you'll notice that both of them have the same framing of the world. And that's one of the things that's really wonderful in allowing the viewer to have some time to spend some time with images like these. This is also a great example of what you can do with images that are really, really high resolution. You can go in for detail. And I'm going to, all right. Who knew I had so much to say about all this? It is later than I thought. This is how that show opened. Doing a lot more layering than I had been comfortable with. You have plenty of time to gaze at this map. It's unrecognizable. You might look at the text and say, well, that's right side up. He's right side up. What's over here? Bulgaria, okay. Germania, Bavaria. That looks like a boot. Oh my God, it's Italy. It's upside down. This is how I imagine someone looking at this image over the course of the 2-minute introduction to this first piece. When the music starts to have some meter again, in comes one of those dry point engravings. Very slowly. Again, I'm working around PowerPoint because you can't pan and zoom. So very slowly coming in. I'm going to stop share. Okay. I want to make sure I move ahead because I want to get all of this in. I'm going to bring us right up to 2020. Right, so I've left the bounds of medieval multimedia and the bounds of don't mess with the sources. I'm playing around with them, I'm framing them, I'm doing a lot of things that the little scholar on my shoulder might question. I want to jump ahead to 3 more concerts very quickly to show you some things that I've learned to do, lessons that I've come away with. Going to share screen again. Here's the Empress. This is rather recent. And I have 2019 and 2020 because this is one of the programs that we turned into a video in 2020. So I had a chance to revisit what I had done. One of the pieces was Cesti's opera Pomodoro, and there are fantastic set designs, which you could certainly use. But it's not quite right for the kind of not entirely staged performance that the consort was doing. So I manipulated the heck out of that particular image to come up with this character who's flying in. You can see how distorted the rest of the image is, but it works for the setting, for the sort of theatrical thing that we're trying to do. This program also had a couple of jokes, and Ellen wanted me to do something that would explain 2 of the jokes in this concert. The first of which was in this humorous retelling of Orfeo, which was written by the emperor. The emperor wrote this piece, wrote the text of it. And there's this one part in the story where they say, hey, let's give the emperor a hand. Now, it's not funny if you don't know that the poet is the emperor. So here's how that worked out. So that gave me a chance to use the jiggly thing that you can do with PowerPoint, which I otherwise never use. And there was one more joke in this same concert, this time in Pomodoro. We have Pallas Athena, who, as you would know if you were a courtier in the 17th century, Pallas Athena is associated with the owl for wisdom. So she's all about owls. And you have to know that to get this particular joke. Do you know who this is? Yeah, it's Athena. You can tell by the duck on her head. Not a duck. This is a great idea. It was Ellen's idea. It breaks the fourth wall, but it's spirit of the piece, and it's fun. And in this case, this image by Rembrandt was the only one of Pallas Athena with the owl on her helmet that met all criteria that I could use. So it was this image that formed the basis of choosing the other ones to go around in this part of the show. Okay. I also want to say something briefly about instrumental pieces, suites. In this show, there were a couple of them. One, and I'm going to show you something that doesn't really work well, but I gave it a shot, and then something that works a lot better. The first one, this is a summary image of what I did for this particular suite by Leopold I, is have images of Maria Theresa and Leopold over the years. They have lots of portraits, so one in for each of the movements. There we go. There are lots of reasons that is not the perfect solution, but one of the nice things about it is that made sure that people had seen the emperor's mug enough that when that joke came up about the emperor as the poet, they might get it. So that's one benefit. What I prefer is a solution like this. Find one vast canvas that's really busy, has a lot going on. Over the course of the several movements of an instrumental piece, take a tour of that. With PowerPoint, there's no pan and zoom. So I just had one detail for each movement. When I made a video, I could do something a lot more persuasive rhetorically. A quick tour here. Oops. This is an image of the nuptials of Thetis and Peleus, which connects thematically to Il Pomodoro, which was a central piece in this concert. And I've clued in changes of image to changes of pace or changes of section. And finally, we can pan and zoom because it's video. Oh, stop share for a second. So revisiting these older programs in the age of Corona and the age of, for me, video, has been a great opportunity to rethink what I did originally and what I might do differently. In some cases, I've found better images, higher resolution. And of course, in the context of video, I can do a lot more. I can zoom in and give motion to the visuals the way that I wanted to, frankly. And I've also gotten a little more comfortable, again, manipulating the images. So here's an example of what I mean. I'm going to share my screen again. And this is an example from the Songs of the Sephardim concert, originally in 2017 and revisited in 2020 for me. Here's a wonderful Tetragrammaton, the name of God, in Hebrew, of course, with this manuscript, 14th century Iberian. I can't remember the precise details. It's at the British Library. And this is what the image looks like in the British Library. You can see the facing page here on the right. And this is how I used it in the slideshow version. So you see, I've tucked it over to the right side of the screen because it's not symmetrical. And what are you going to do? And I had some shading, pretend like this is in front of a window, right? Now for the video, I paired this because we went from a Sephardic piece to a solo piece, not a solo piece, an instrumental piece for oud. So I'm pairing it with this image from the ceiling from the Alhambra. And you'll see that there's a certain resonance. They're both symmetrical, got a circle and a square, all sorts of wonderful things going on there. That zoom out is what I did in the concert. Again, manipulating PowerPoint, bending it to my will to create that effect. When it came time to do the video, I cheated. This is that same page, and I copied this side of the manuscript, flipped it over and put it here. I fuzzied up the connection here. I fuzzied up the things that would make it obvious what I've done, but not so much that it's like restoring a piece of art. You're not supposed to make it look too good. You're supposed to show, little traces. So that's what the idea was here. And with this now being symmetrical, I can play around with it, formally speaking, when I pair it with that ceiling from the Alhambra. And here I'll give you an idea of what that looks like. You can barely see it here at the beginning, but it's zooming in, very slowly zooming in. I'll jump ahead after the cadence. There we go. So we're still zooming in. We're still zooming in. Zoomed all the way in. Transition to the next piece. So trying to make that connection, pulling out the visual consonants between the two images. And then the conceit here, we continue zooming in closer and closer. And I'm going to zoom forward a little bit. It's a very long, unmeasured, gorgeous, introduction isn't the right word. This is the piece, but this long, unmeasured section. Oh, come on. This is the end of the unmeasured section. Measure. And with that switch from unmeasured to measured, the motion of the image changes. We were zooming in, then the spin started. Just enough to match the feeling of the music. And what happens over the course of this is it zooms all the way out and then disappears in a bright transition to white, which I don't often use, but there we go. All right. So getting more and more comfortable with playing around with things, which really set me up well for, and this is my last couple of examples, Mexmas, the Mexican Christmas video that I put together for the Consort in November for the last Christmas season. And the conceit of this concert, the way that it, at the end point, at least, it ends at night. It begins in the main square of Mexico City with the marketplace, and we have this fantastic 18th century painting of the marketplace. Carriages, sellers everywhere, the the cathedral over here, and as you'll see in a second, some buskers out front. And the conceit is taking, we're going from the market square with these folk musicians and then hearing music from a nearby convent and walking in to hear that. And I was able to put together something that mimicked that. And I used a lot of stock footage, again, which is something I never would have used before, but this is taking it to another level. And I'm just so darn pleased. This is one of the my favorite things is this flight. Whoa. This imagined flight over the fields outside of Mexico City. It's dawn. Sun is about to crest over the horizon. You hear the music starting. A cloud comes in. And in a flash, we're in 18th century Mexico City, still flying in the same direction. And it's going to take us all the way up and over till we focus on those musicians up here. And eventually, we hear the women of the convent. And we're transported inside the doors. And the outdoors melt away. But it's still that flying over the fields thing that gets me every time. This is my last example to point out manipulations and some more stock footage. A couple of wonderful engravings that are too great. They're late 19th century, much later than I want, but they're too good not to use because the concert ends at night. And here, the image on the right is, that's the cathedral in Mexico City. Crowds of people out on the street. If you look closely, they're clearly 19th century people. There's a streetcar, for heaven's sake. What I did in the video is juicing some of the color and the shading and trying to make it look as, trying to avoid as much of the 19th century detritus as was entirely possible. So here's what that looked like. It was also part of an imagined trip. With this instrumental piece, we're inside the cathedral in this imagined nighttime service, which has nothing to do with what the subject actually was. And now we walk outside. And we're walking out the doors and we see all the people gathered. And you can tell that I've darkened this image, pulled out the little fires so they stick out a little more. And it zooms out from this detail. Again, it's great to have a high-res image. And because of the kind of image it is, I can put the text right in the middle, which is perfect for this ending piece and for just the feel of it. And then there's this transition, again, pulling in a lot of stock footage for this last coup de théâtre. Zooming all the way out. If you look closely, there's the streetcar. Don't look in the bottom left corner. I've juiced up the moon so it looks like it's shining brighter. So it's taken me from being very rooted in the sources, and we have to just show the sources because this is historically informed performance, and moving finally to something that is very different. It's in the same vein, obviously, but really playing fast and loose and hopefully well with the imagery and the music. So I'm happy to take questions, and I'm sorry that I went long. I
Oh,
didn't anticipate that.
I am not sorry, because I don't want to lose a second of this. It's so interesting, even for me, who's been alongside you through this journey. I have to say that the thing that I find really most exciting about the Mexican Christmas video that you made for us is that that concert had a certain theatricality, an oral theatricality, and the distance between the two ensembles and the quality of their sound. But also an amazing visuals of all the exotic instruments that we had, and the beauty of the venues, and the theatrical sense that we were trying to create of the beginning, which was of kind of chaos in the town square and this imposed order from the church. So when I came to you with that as, you know, your assignment, should you choose to accept it, I fully expected you to say, you know, I'm a doctor, not a, you know, cinematographer. But no, you actually created something that for us feels like it felt to be there. And I just want to tell everybody who's still on with us right now that that is going to be released as both a CD and we hope a DVD in the next Christmas season on Parma Records. So if you loved that visual, come to the concert, but then take it home with you too, because it's a really fabulous representation, Shawn.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, it's thrilling.
So fun.
I have seen lots of happy comments here. What a terrific idea to have you here to show us how you found those images. I'm curious to know, Shawn, while I wait for some other folks to type in their questions. We give you a few months notice on the topic of our concert, and I know that that's when you start thinking. Then we aim for 6 weeks, but often it's a month before we get you a pile of scores. As a musician yourself and as a music historian, of course, you can look at those scores and have an idea about what we're going to do. But in fact, because this music is so much a performer's art, we very often manipulate and change and lengthen or shorten or you know, do a lot of things that you could not possibly anticipate. And we try to keep you posted. But would you tell us a little bit about how you manage that preparatory work and leave room for the final tweaking that makes it mesh with the music so brilliantly?
Sure. And here I will say that my gift for procrastination comes in handy. If I'm freighting the end of the production timeline with the most of the work, it's very smooth to put the finishing touches on during the rehearsal week. And it's absolutely true. Often I will have roughed things in and I have images that I have in mind and a certain idea for getting from one image to the next or how to move through a certain image. But then I hear what you're actually doing and it doesn't work at all. I have to use a different image, or I have to change the timing, or I've done research to find other images. And luckily now I'm handy enough with PowerPoint that I can do that and make a creditable final product
Right.
In a couple days. So a lot of the work happens during that week, the week of rehearsals.
Well, I've certainly see this where, you know, you'll come to a rehearsal when we're it's always, you know, a real kind of rush to the finish line, because we will start rehearsing on Monday, but we need to show you what we've got by Wednesday in order for you to have a first listen to it live and begin tweaking according to our pacing, and then do a dress rehearsal Thursday. So I imagine you have some late nights on Wednesday nights. Yeah, and it's also very interesting because when we work together on this, sometimes I'll sit by Shawn and I'll see how the super titles go, because I write the super titles, I give them to Shawn, she coordinates them with the score, but sometimes I look at them on the screen and I go, oh, that sentence is too long, it needs to be quicker, or this, could you split that into 2 screens? I'd like that idea to have more time. And so we spend a lot of musicianly time, arty time, tweaking the pacing to suit both our senses of the flow of the piece.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing. I see we have some questions now. Let me Aisha, hi. Aisha would like to know what software you use besides PowerPoint and about how many hours does it take you to put together one of these? I don't think you want to say because then I'm going to have to give you a raise.
Right. You know, I have started keeping track because I'm freelancing now. So I keep track of the time I spend working. I rarely look at that time because I work on a fee basis. But that is to say, somewhere in my computer, it will tell me how long I spend, but I try not to think about it. In terms of software, I use PowerPoint. I've started using Pixlr online. It's a Photoshop like thing that's on the that's web based to trim down images because I want to keep high quality, high resolution images without making a PowerPoint that is 3 gigs. You know, so that's a balance. And I also use Pixlr to make some of those manipulations. When it comes to video, I've been using not the highfalutin Adobe software, but Filmora Pro, which is by Wondershare, which is a middlingly expensive, I think it's $150 for a lifetime subscription. I started with a 1-year subscription and it's perfectly fine if you're going to start video editing and want to be able to do things like the so-called Ken Burns effect. Simply, if you want to pan and zoom, if you want to have that kind of degree of control, Filmora Pro gives you those tools to use. It's not as great as the Adobe product, the name of which I am forgetting right now, but it's a great entry-level video editing program that lets you play with those more sophisticated.
Nan offers Premiere Pro.
Premiere Pro, thank you, Nan. Yes, indeed. Now that I've seen Premiere Pro, Nan let me play around with hers, and I now know what I'm missing. Okay. It is a superior product in every way.
Right. Well, you have a thank you from Aisha for answering that, and says she also does not dare keep track of her hours on most things that she did. I think most creative people would agree, because unfortunately you wake up thinking about it in the middle of the night. Does that count? I don't know. So,
right.
We have a wonderful compliment from Lynn. I think this is our Lynn Schatz, one of our old-time, long-time fans, and she says, even with the explanations and examples, it's still magic and magical during the performances. And I agree. For me, it even deepens because I see more. It deepens the experience when I've gone through it with you in this granular detail that we sometimes do. And thank you, Fred Bates says, as the current generation would say, awesome. Awesome. There, let me say it right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sandra Ham wonders, what size and resolution images do you need to have so that doesn't pixelate on the projector screen?
Yeah.
Projection screen. I said the wrong
projection screen, right. We're using HD, full HD, which is 1920 by 1080. And there's all sorts of sophisticated math that has to do with projecting. A higher resolution than 1080 by 1920 won't be perceptible, which is why it's useful to resize your images before putting it into the program, so you don't overload so you're not overloading the system for no good reason. But I'm very happy when the pixels are in the 2000, 3000, 4000 range either way, because then I know going in that there'll be some room to play, especially with the videos where you can zoom in and have that motion. Having pixel sizes in the thousands, the more thousands, the better. You can always pick out those details and use them separately. But sometimes you find a fantastic image that isn't available at the size that you like, or sure, you could have one that you could zoom in to, Venus's navel if you wanted to, but it's through Getty Images, and it would cost $500 for those 2 minutes. So no, I'll do something different. No, that's there are constraints. There's a whole set of constraints. Size and cost are two of them main ones.
Maybe this is a good time for me to add that we are very sensitive about copyright, and we do limit our projects to things that are free use or we purchase. And it has happened that we've wanted an image so much that we've popped $50 or $75 for it. Someday, maybe when, well, you never know. We may be able to afford Getty Images. It could be terrific. Right. We have another question from Erica, who's asking, this is a great question, Erica, because yeah, she's asking, can you tell us a bit about the moment of performance? Because you're performing too. You know, what does it look like? Do you have a score in front of you? All these transitions, how do you prepare? And I will say that we do consider Shawn part of the cast of every show. She's paid the same as the musicians, everything. Maybe she should get more, but we consider her a full performer in the project. It's not somebody who sits there and pushes go.
Yeah. Yes, I have a cue book that is marked up. One of the great things about being there for rehearsal week and being the projectionist myself is that I don't have to explain it to somebody else. So the cues can be minimal. Sometimes I confuse myself. I've learned over the years to, if there's a super long transition, if it's a 30-second transition, I need to know that in everywhere possible so that I don't panic and think I haven't hit the button and I hit it again and we jump forward. That's happened a couple times. Right. So yes, I have a cue book and I'm waiting. Everything revolves around those cues for the text, and that's part of the limitation. A limitation for PowerPoint is that I can't have the images doing one thing on one stream and then have the super titles come in separately. There's software that does that. Video VJs, video disc jockeys, there's software that they use. There is theatrical software that allows for multiple cues happening on different, not wavelengths, but going on at different times. That's stuff I know of now. I now know that exists and I'm interested to learn, but I'm still using PowerPoint. So it all has to be prioritized around getting the text cues at the right place and the right time. But I use all kinds of animations. You can play around with PowerPoint. You can use animations, quote unquote animations. I only use fade, except for this is not a duck, where that's sort of like a jiggle thing, not a duck, or the pulsating, the poet right here, emperor. I've used those sorts of animations very sparingly. Fade in, fade out, transitions between slides is a big one. Yeah, there are lots of ways to manipulate. But the biggest challenge, if I'm doing something trying to be cinematic, which inevitably means 30-second long transitions, just making sure that I don't mess up and hit the button twice, because it will wreck everything. So well, that answers the question. But
I think it's great. I mean, I've watched you walk into a performance hall, and most of the time you've been in touch with them in advance with the tech crew, so that you know what you're walking into, what the appropriate cables are that you need, the adapters that you need. Any of you who has ever had to give a talk not in your own house and take your little computer and your PowerPoint lecture notes and have everything blows up because their system doesn't like your system, knows how scary this can be. So I know you do a lot of prep in that area, and I've also heard, troubleshooting going on between you and the crew, adjusting to the distance of the camera from the screen, or whether it's rear projection and can you sit behind. We have all kinds of our own equipment that we can take, but we often try to work with what's in a hall as well. So that's another challenge for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a whole collection now of cables and connectors, and
right.
Just try to build out some redundancy.
Right.
So to avoid catastrophe.
We have loads of compliments in the chat. I'll deliver a few of them, and then I'll just wrap up with some comments of my own. Compliments on the Mexican Christmas video, Shawn, from somebody, from Doug, who was not able to be at the concert, but we're thrilled to see it with the scene set for the video. So Doug, I hope you'll be able to come hear us in December 2021. Nels Snadis, who's been one of our guest directors and was here for did our Sephardim program with us, also loves what you do and your wonderful support of our music.
Thank you.
Nan says the concerts are wonderful. Thank you, Nan. That's a little nod to the concert. And thank you for your virtuosity, Shawn. And I think that's a great segue to my comments, which I just want to point out to everybody that you can't pull a graphic artist off the street and come up with this kind of content. What Shawn possesses, because she is herself a musician, she is also a scholar and knows how to do deep dive research. She is a musicologist in our field, so she knows how to make connections having to do with the style of the music and not just the year it was published or the town it was performed in. And in addition, and this is not insignificant, Shawn is a linguist, so she can look at those super titles and look at my score and line everything up. She understands when there's a certain cadence to the text that needs to match the cadence of the music, and that is what really makes this magical. I mean, I think it would be pretty and it would have super titles, but what Shawn does, we've come to realize, is she's like another member of the ensemble, performing and phrasing and working with rhetorical gesture, and everything that we put into the music she puts into these visuals. And wow, I mean, we're just blown away. I have to admit, there were times when we were talking about this in the early days where I said, I don't want people watching TV while we play. I want to really, I want this to be, one of a kind. And Shawn gets that, and she has created that. So yeah, more loads of compliments to you about syncing the movement of the image to the movement of the music is mind-blowing. Brings the Consort's performances to an entirely new level. I know this is a love fest, but sorry, Shawn. It's true, and it we artists, we musicians always think in these pictorial ways. I often tell my students I see a movie in my head when I'm singing a song, and you bring that to the audience with us, which is fantastic. So
thank you everyone. It's great to hear. We're in 1 year into the pandemic, so bring on. I'll take it. Right.
No, it's been fantastic, and the way that you helped us keep bringing music back over the year when we couldn't do concerts. You gave it a fresh coat of paint, a new outfit, everything. It was just fabulous. So we'll see you next year, Shawn. We'll be starting Mexican Christmas in December. We will have some video. I don't know if it'll be exactly what you just saw. You may tweak it a little bit for performance. I don't know. Yeah, and then 2 concerts in the spring, one on music for the Medicis from the 14th century and one from the 17th and 18th centuries about gals playing cards and gossiping. So you're going to have fun with that one. Yeah.
I can't wait.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions for Shawn, let's give her a hand. You can unmute yourself if you want to.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody, and thank you.
Yay!
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, all. Enjoy the weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.
We hope you enjoyed this behind-the-scenes video presentation. We look forward to seeing you at a concert soon.